Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Pulp Fiction. So, the one thing that I immediately want to bring up is From Paris with Love. The funny thing about that movie is we have like a little Easter egg of this movie from that film, to where John Travolta goes on and is to purposely have guys get him like a Royale with cheese, and like that's a whole like Easter egg to this movie, which I thought was really interesting, because we go on and have in the early stages of this film Vincent going on and talking about how he went to Europe, and in Paris, like, they don't call it like a quarter pounder with cheese, they end up just calling it a Royale with cheese, and so on and so forth, because they don't have the metric system there. And so you have to easily say everything going on between Vincent and Jules, hence why they have that's why they're pictured here. Them together is like the best part of this film, and then everything else is just kind of icing on the cake. We have like a lot of dialogue going on in this film, and I would normally complain about that. I'm like, man, this movie is just filled with brain with just dialogue, and I have to memorize it all. But actually, the dialogue, especially when it's usually a Quentin Tarantino movie, the dialogue is actually really interesting. It's really fascinating. Even though it might be a lot about nothing, I just kind of still find it interesting. That's the very interesting thing about Quentin Tarantino, is just his just way of just making even dialogue in a movie with an action kind of film memorable. So there might be some times where there is some unsavory language being used in this movie, and that is what it is, because sometimes like stuff is just kind of thrown out there. So the funny thing about John Travolta, the way he was to get this movie was he was to meet up with Quentin Tarantino, and supposedly while they were talking, Quentin wanted to set up John Travolta to do the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, and John was to go on and tell Quentin, it's like, I'm not really interested in a vampire movie. I don't want to be a vampire. Let's go with something else that you're working with. And so Quentin, I guess, just had just so many scripts just lying around to do a bajillion movies, it seems. And so John was to go on and see this kind of Pulp Fiction movie, and John settled on that. Just like, well, this seems interesting. Let's kind of see where this goes. And plus also, like, it technically got John to again do a movie where he's dancing again. Because if we know good and well, like Saturday Night Fever and all the stuff that he did before, where he would go on and Grease and just kind of sing or dance or whatever. And so John kind of going and doing this in Pulp Fiction, to have this be another thing that Travolta is to be, of course, known for, is just really interesting. So with that said, let's go into the tee-up version of this movie, because there's so many characters that we're going to have to talk about here. So the tee-up version of it is we have Pumpkin and Honey Bun, this Bonnie and Clyde kind of character that are going on and trying to figure out what is the best thing to really go and rob, because they are to, I guess, be living off of whatever they are to rob, basically. So we have those characters being placed into this film. But then not only that, we have both Vincent and Jules, who are working together as these hitmen, and they are to be working for a guy named Marcellus Wallace, who we find out is Ving Rhames in this film, and he will also get his own kind of story within here that technically ties to Butch's story, who is Bruce Willis. So, um, so we have both Vincent and Jules who get into their own adventure and make a simple mistake, which is to have them go on and lead them to Quentin Tarantino's character, who is actually to be God, who is he in this film? Jimmy. There we go. And so we have that kind of going on. And the one thing that is technically kind of confusing in this film is we have like a lot of stuff that kind of intertwines where you're just like, wait a minute, like we like have like one movie without a certain thing, and then we kind of go back to it, and it's just kind of like, what? I get a little confused. But that's going to be fairly easily to do within this film. So we also have Butch's character, who is to be this prize fighter who has this very strange and obscure story that, of course, we have this soldier named Kuhn, played by Christopher Walken, that is to tell him about this watch and the history of it. And so Butch going on and being this prize fighter and have this whole watch being tied into this story eventually will lead Butch into dangerous territories, and eventually hope that by the end of this that he's going to get out of here unscathed. And so with that said, that covers, like, in a very, very vague way, most of what happens within this movie. Because we also have the setup of Vincent, who is played by John Travolta, who is to go on a date with a girl named Maya. And we have Jules, who's calling it a date, and Vincent's like, no, like, it's just me going on and taking a man's wife out to dinner. There's nothing more than that, because of course that wife is Wallace's wife, and for some odd reason this guy can't go on and take this girl out himself, so Vincent is to now be the second best choice, and there ends up being some problems within this date towards the end of it. So with that said, there's probably a billion other things that I could have also just kind of put in place here. But with that said, what would be left in spoilers? So with that said, I'm just going to go on and go into spoilers, because there's a lot of to have to go on and say here, because tons and tons of dialogue. So with that said, let's go into that double 5 time territory, because I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers anyways. Right now, this movie is currently available on Showtime. There's a number of different kind of apps that I've used over time. But also Showtime does have a 30-day trial, so if you've never been in Showtime before, never had a free trial done with them, they have like a month for free. So eventually, if you want to just kind of check out like The Man Who Fell to Earth, because that's, I think, the new show that's on there, and so far that I've seen with just the first episode of that, it actually looks pretty fun. Even though there's a lot of science jargon, check out my review if you want to go ahead and do that. But like eventually there's Pulp Fiction, and there's a number of other things. But if you go on to any new released movie that came out within this year, more than likely I will go on and probably have a number of apps that you can probably use over time. So I'm just saying like Showtime, because it has a 30-day trial, but go on to a number of other reviews that I've possibly done, and you'll probably find a list of apps that you can watch a movie for absolutely free. So with that said, let's go into that double 5 time territory. Let's just of course, go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of it, we have both Pumpkin and we have Honey Bun that are at this restaurant. And so Pumpkin, who is played by Tim Roth, is talking about what they should go on and try to rob next. What's their plan to go on and try to get a better payout? Or what would be like the most reasonable payout for them to do? So Pumpkin is to go on and mention that there has been times that if someone is to do a bank robbery, that someone could simply come into a bank and have a phone and hold up the bank with just a simple phone and rob them. And so, because also if you've ever seen the movie like Compliance and seen that like prank film where someone is to call this this fast food restaurant and go on and humiliate a woman, which this story ends up being actually true. And I was like, wow, this story just seems wild, but it's true. So Pumpkin is to go on and explain that liquor stores, like the places that they have consistently gone on and consistently tried to rob, are always the worst, because it seems that there's a lot of times where they go into these stores and no one actually speaks English. So like Pumpkin could go on and hold his gun up and no one will understand what he's saying. And at some points there are some even more dangerous liquor stores. And so they're going on and on and on about like, well, like where should be the best place that they could really go on and eventually rob next. And Pumpkin is all of a sudden thinking, it's like, well, hey, like, why don't we just go on and rob like restaurants? Like restaurants, there's a number of people that like there's a manager that doesn't care. There's a bunch of people that are just kind of working for tips, so they don't care. And so like that should probably be like the easiest place. Like insurance will cover whatever they lose. So, and plus they've also rationalized that if they steal everything from everyone's wallet and then leave here, I'm like, man, that's gotta suck, because when you really think about it, you're robbing somebody who's to want to try to go on and pay for their food, and now they can't do that because you took everything from their wallet. That seems horrible. If anything, the only person that you're really taking advantage of is the person who is to have gotten their wallet taken. But so, Pumpkin and Honey Bun or Honey Bunny are to want to go on and rob this restaurant. And so like that's just the beginning of the story that we end up seeing. So transition to have both Vincent and Jules, who are driving along together, and that's when Vincent is to break into that whole dialogue about like, hey, like, because Vincent was to go on and go to Amsterdam for 3 years, and Vincent was to come back and mention to Jules about the kind of differences between being there and being here. And so he mentions about the Royale with cheese, and Big Mac is to be called the Big Mac for whatever reason. And so we of course ask Jules, or have Jules ask Vincent, it's like, well, what is a Whopper? And Vincent's like, well, I don't know, like I never went into a Burger King. But so Vincent is to also say like the reason why they didn't say a quarter pounder with cheese is because of the metric system there. And so like that's the whole reason for Royale with cheese being named that. So, and plus also there's some times when they have mayo instead of ketchup there, because it's like really for me, like I don't ever know if I would really notice a difference between like mayo or ketchup being only on a burger. I don't know. Like I guess if I were to go on and just um have a cheeseburger that only had like mayo on it, I'd probably maybe taste a tweakingly bit of different. But anyways, so so after that bit of dialogue, now they're making their way to go on and talk to these men, Marvin, Brett, and Roger, I believe. And so we have these guys, and so while both Vincent and while both Jules are kind of waiting for the proper time, they're again having more dialogue. So Jules is to mention this story about how there was this guy who was to, of course, be called um, Antonio. Antonio. And I guess this guy was like Samoan, and so I guess this guy had a nickname of Tony, uh, Tony Rocky Horror. So Antonio evidently went on and was to at one point be with Marcellus Wallace's wife, Maya. Of course, if you know Maya, she's Uma Thurman in this movie. And so Antonio was to go on and rub this woman's feet. And so now Jules and Vincent are kind of backing and forthing about what was to happen to Antonio afterwards. And so what happened to Antonio was Wallace was to have a bunch of guys go on and find Antonio and kind of drop him off this this ledge or this roof or this whatever, and eventually injure this guy, and all of that just because of Maya getting her feet massaged. And so really Vincent and Jules are kind of backing and forthing about whether or not that seems right. That seems like the right call. That seems like the right judgment. And then Vincent would go on and ask Jules, it's like, well, hey, would you ever like massage another man's foot? And Jules is like, well, no. Then it's like, well, yeah, then like it is like it is like a real like important thing for this guy to have gone on and done that to this guy's wife. And that Vincent is trying to ask Jules is like, well, hey man, like, you know what, like I'm starting to get a little tired. You want to massage my feet? And Jules like, seriously, you're gonna keep bringing this up? They just keep going back and forthing about it, to where Vincent is to bring up a really good point about the whole massaging foot thing, and but Jules is to mention that he would go on and massage like his own mother's foot, and so like they're trying to go on and try to bicker back and forth, but eventually like the real uh thing is like you don't go and you just do this to anybody. You're probably wanting to go on and get something afterwards as some reward, bizarrely, um or whatever. So finally, after Vincent and Jules are waiting enough long enough and have this whole story put out here. Finally, they go into this place where Jules is to go on and talk to a guy named Brett. Weirdly, people have to bring this up for some goofy reason, because Jules at one point is to call Brett Brad at some point, and they just kept it in the movie. And when really looking at it, like, if no one would have ever said anything, I would have probably never noticed it. Because sadly enough, Frank Whaley's character, I wouldn't have cared because he's just a small character in this movie. So, but yeah, since someone like brought it up that it's like, oh yeah, like he said Brad instead of Brett, just messes with me. So Jules is to go on and is to notice that these guys had gotten breakfast, and weirdly their breakfast is just some kind of burger. And so we go on and we have Jules, who is to ask them like what kind of burger that they got, and it's some unique burger. And Jules was to always ever want to go on and try this new burger joint out, because of course his woman that he's with is a vegetarian, so that makes him a vegetarian forcibly, because he wants to eventually just kind of please his woman by also being a vegetarian. So Jules is to go on and try this burger, and is just like, yeah, like this is like really good, like all right, like so. And then he is to try Brett's Sprite, and he goes, all right. You would have thought at one point that Jules would have been like, man, like I could just come in here and eat your burger and eat your food, so, and have your drink and everything. Like, man, I'm just taking everything for you. So Jules goes on and is to mention that he works for Marcellus Wallace, and is to eventually ask Brett to be able to describe Wallace to him. And so Brett is to go on, and after he ends up getting shot in the shoulder, he starts mentioning that he's bald and this and that. And so, but Jules is to say, it's like, well, like, so, but he's not a person to be effed with, so to speak. Let's try to adjust a little bit of the language here. So Brett is like, well, no, of course, like he's not a guy that's to be effed with. And Jules is to go on and say, it's like, well, like, well, that's obviously what he feels, but like I think that you guys are going and trying to F with him. So, because Jules is to realize these guys were to sneak something away, and so Vincent and Jules are to ask where it is, as Jules is to kill one of Brett's people right in front of him. And Jules is to call like the guy that he ends up killing like Flock of Seagulls, which is a name of a band. And so they find this briefcase in this cupboard, and they look at the briefcase and like, okay, like whatever this is like a fantastic thing that they just found in this briefcase, and it's just shimmering out with light for whatever it really is. And when they go on and they show this briefcase in one other scene later on in the film, like it's just shining and like, oh my god, this is beautiful. So Jules then goes on and is to kill Brett, and then is to take Marvin, who is played by Phil LaMarr, which like I enjoy Phil LaMarr. Went on and like would know that he would go on and do a number of voiceover work, but then I also liked his like Mad TV stuff I always kind of say that whenever I see Phil Lamar, just kind of knowing that he went on and did like a number of just really cool, like Static Shock, John Stewart's Green Lantern, a bunch of cool stuff at some point. Um, but like we'll get past that. So we have Jules and we have Vincent who are eventually going and taking Marvin, and we'll get to that story. Uh, so we also had Vincent that was mentioning to Jules that he is going to go on a date with Mia. But Vincent is to say, like, no, man, I'm just going to take this woman out for, like, a nice evening. Like, there's nothing going to be attached to this. And Jules is like, oh, so it's a date. And Vincent's like, no, like, this woman is already with somebody. Like, I'm just kind of being the gentleman and doing the nice thing and just kind of taking this girl out on a night of the town. And Jules is like, well, yeah, but that's technically a date. But like the whole story of Marcellus Wallace going on and doing that horrible thing to that guy was to lead to another part of this story where Vincent goes on and asks Maya about that story when he meets her. But we'll get to that in a second. So let me wrap up one part of this story that I feel like I'm kind of having something linger here. So Vincent and Jules take Marvin, and there of course is to be another guy who comes out of this bathroom guns a-blazing, and every single bullet ends up missing both Jules and both Vincent. And we not only had Jules, who is to recite this Bible verse before going on and killing some people in here, we have Jules that is to say that this moment of him like dodging all these bullets was a sign, it was a miracle, and that Jules wants Vincent to acknowledge it, and Vincent finally does. And so Jules is seeing this as some miraculous sign that he needs to go on, and he finally now needs to retire because this guy like is to go on and just have this like epiphany that he needs to go on and do something different with his life and go on and be like the guy from Kung Fu who's just kind of going from place to place being this bum. But we'll get to that. There's a whole nother story that we're going to eventually get to. So moving on. So Vincent is to take out Maya to this restaurant that he's unfamiliar with. Before that, Vincent is to go on and meet his drug dealer, who's a guy named Lance. And before meeting Lance, he ends up meeting these two women. And we have a girl named Jody who has all these like piercings all over her, and is to mention all these piercings that she goes on and has. And Vincent is to ask Jody, it's like, well, hey, like, why do you have the tongue ring? And Jody's to mention it's like, well, that's because like fellatio. And Vincent's like, oh, okay, all right. So Vincent goes on and meets with Lance, and we have Lance who's going on and having a number of cocaine and stuff like that he has gone on from like a number of different locations. And so we have Vincent that is to have spent some time in Amsterdam, and this is where one of these drugs have come from. And so Vincent wants the Amsterdam stuff, but he also wants to try this other product. And so Lance goes on and is to cut a specific kind of product here, but then Vincent may come back for more. So Lance goes on and is to kind of prepare Vincent's drug of choice, and Lance is to kind of offer up one of the women for Vincent, and Vincent's like, no, like, because I definitely don't want the girl with all the piercings, and no, I'm not really interested. So Vincent goes off with Maya to go to this restaurant that, of course, is to be called the Jackrabbit Slims. So we have Vincent and Maya going to this restaurant, and this is a kind of, I would say, like a 50s style kind of restaurant. We have Marilyn Monroe. We have Dean Martin, Buddy Holly, uh, Buddy Holly. We have Steve Buscemi as Buddy Holly. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of characters from Reservoir Dogs like in this movie. We have at some point the guy who is to be called the Wolf, who's also from the Reservoir Dogs, and I thought that was so interesting. So, but eventually I'll talk about that later. So, we have eventually where Maya is to go to the bathroom to snort up cocaine, because this girl keeps taking drugs during this date. So Vincent is to go on and kind of just talk to Maya, and eventually they get to the point of these awkward silences, and Maya is to go on and say, like, you know what, I don't think that we've known one another quite yet, to be able to kind of handle these awkward silences. Because if you know a lot of, if you know a person well enough, you should be able to kind of, like, really adjust to these kind of moments when, like, you're just kind of looking at one another. So, as well as them having, like, some dialogue moments before, because of course Vincent was to ask Maya about this kind of like $5 shake and a milkshake, and it's like, well, wait a minute, like, is this like a milkshake that has like alcohol in it? Like, and the guy's like, no. And so they're kind of just picking back and forth about their orders. Just kind of, Vincent is fairly intrigued because I guess Maya has been to this place before. So when Maya comes back, we have, of course, Vincent, who's bringing up that whole story about what Jules had told him about Antonio. And so we have Maya that goes on of like, do you seriously believe that story? Do you really think that something like that would really legitimately happen? And Vincent's like, well, I don't know. Like, like, I just heard this story. Like, I've heard it through the grapevine. So I just thought I would go to the source and figure out if that was really true. So I don't think we really get the answer of that. But then we turn around and we had it also, like, Jules was talking about Maya and mentioning how Maya was to be on this this pilot that had never gotten picked up to eventually become a show. Because Jules is to break down, like, hey, like, you're a person that watches TV, right? And Vincent's like, well, yeah. And so the very first episode of a show is called a pilot, hence why I would probably go on and call a lot of shows pilots, and some people may not understand what that really means. But I would just say it anyways, because I can and I will. So, and some people may not know the technical term of that, but so, Jules is to break down that the first episode of every show is always called a pilot, and if a pilot ends up getting picked up, then, like, a show will eventually come after that. And so it seems that Maya was to go on and be on a show that never got picked up. And so she ended up getting her 15 minutes. So Jules is to go on and explain that she was involved in some kind of like Charlie kind of show with 5 women, and like somehow 5 ended up getting like put into the title of the show. Like uh, it was something Force 5. Like I don't remember what it was, but it probably fit within the whole F gimmick. So we have Jules going on and explaining how there were certain characters that kind of fit with what they were doing. How, like, there was one girl that was this explosive expert, and eventually there's all these kinds of certain exports. And so Maya was supposed to be the knife expert, and so she was to be like this knife chucker. I guess that's what her kind of story was. And weirdly, her little side thing that she was to do was supposedly tell this joke. And so Vincent is to go on and like, well, like, since you had like the pilot episode where in every single episode you had to tell the joke, what was the joke that you had? And Maya's like, well, hey, like, it's a stupid joke, you're not gonna laugh. And Vincent's like, no, tell me what the joke is. And so Maya's like, well, we've been building this up for too long, like, I'll joke now. So Vincent's like, what the fuck? Tell me the goddamn joke. No. Whoa. So we go on and we all of a sudden have this dance off, this competition that's going on. And so all of a sudden we have it where the people that have the restaurant are putting together some kind of like sidestep kind of certain kind of dance. And so we have both Jules and we have both Travolta that are going to or Jules. We have both Maya and we have both Vincent that go on. I'm trying to think of names here. Everything, all the names, everywhere. So Maya and Vincent go on and are to do this dance, and Maya wants this trophy, and more than likely there might not have really been any kind of competition because they end up winning the award. And so Vincent and Maya are going back to her place, and Vincent is going into her bathroom just saying like, yeah, I'm just gonna go on, I'm gonna take this drink, finish it really quick, and then leave. And we have Maya going on, and she's listening to this music and singing along to it. All of a sudden, Maya again is to do more drugs, more cocaine, and this time around she ends up ODing and is to fall over. So Vincent is to find out where Maya is to scramble and make his way to Lance, and Lance is going on and saying like, hey, like, nobody calls past this time of night. And so Vincent is driving like crazy to Lance's place, and conveniently Lance is to be able to have a adrenaline shot to go on and give Maya to bring her back to life. But Lance is really wanting Vincent to go on and just bite the bullet and go to a hospital. But Vincent's like, no, I'm not going to go on and do that, because either way, Vincent can find himself in a lot of serious crap and eventually be killed off by Wallace, Marcellus Wallace, because of what happened to his wife. So we have Vincent making his way to Lance's, and so we have the kind of the very, like, the big scene of this movie where Vincent is to go on and give this giant needle and stab it into of course, Maya's heart and bring her back to life with this adrenaline shot. And it works. And she all of a sudden is to be like very, like, Maya is to, of course, be just very shocked about what had all happened. So Vincent brings Maya back to her place, and he's like, "Oh, like, well, it's a good thing that this girl is still alive. I'm just gonna go home now and have a heart attack." But so Maya is to finally go on and explain this joke to Vincent, and so this is a joke about these tomato family that I guess we have the mother and the father who are kind of walking so quickly in front of the baby tomato that the father ends up getting back to where the son is, and he decides, because considering his son is walking so slow, the father ends up crushing the baby tomato and is to tell him to catch up. What a goofy joke. So Maya is to call it a night, and so we uh well uh we have it here where Vincent is to kind of like do this kind of weird thing and then walk off. So now that all of that is covered, let's go on and let's oh, we have to also cover this one scene because it's also pretty important. So after Vincent and Jules were to go on and kill those guys, supposedly, they go to Marcellus Wallace's place, his bar. And so Marcellus Wallace is talking to a guy named Butch and telling him that he's gonna go down in the fifth round, and that Marcellus is having Butch repeat that, and Butch goes on is like, okay, I'm gonna go down in the fifth. So Butch goes on and is to ask for cigarettes, and is bumping into Vincent and Jules, and so we go on and we have Jules talking to Butch, and so there's kind of this kind of quick dialogue between them, and so they go on and they do their things. So I say that because simply we're going on and covering Butch's story next. Story, let's cover that. So, and there's going to be a lot of interesting things that kind of are like, wait a minute, like, you're going to go on and do a whole nother story after this that goes on and still has certain people alive that were to have been dead at prior story, but it is what it is. So that's just how this movie is. So the Gold Watch. So we're to cover Butch's story, who is to be this boxer, Bruce Willis's character. So we have a guy named Captain Coons who's meeting up with a young Butch to go on and give back this family heirloom to young Butch, because Captain Coons is to have this whole story about Butch's father having so many, like, grandfather, great grandfather, so on and so forth, that has kept this watch in their family throughout all these military experiences, all these wars, and so on and so forth. So Captain Coons, I guess, was to have gone on and been a military prisoner in this war. And so Captain Coons was to go on and be with Butch's father, who had gone on and realized that the only way he may have been able to keep this watch is by putting it up his butt, as to say this would be a prison wallet situation. So, as Boone's father was to realize that he might die during this war, Boone's father was to hand this watch off to Captain Coons, who was to keep it up his butt, and then was to finally, once this mission and he was to be rescued, Captain Coons was to immediately find young Butch and tell him the whole history of this entire watch, because Captain Coons knew every bit of this history of this watch, to give this back to young Butch. So young Butch then goes on is to go and do this this boxing match. So we have Butch, who goes on and does the opposite of what he's supposed to do. Butch goes on and is to nail his guy that he's his opponent and punch him out and then run off to make it onto this cab, where come to find out that the radio is to mention that Butch was to have killed his opponent. So Butch is to quickly make it out of this boxing arena to go into this taxi cab and make his way home for them to get the heck out of there. So Butch then goes on and, his not actual home, he goes on and is to have like this hotel room that he has with his woman, who is Fabian, I believe is the name. So Butch goes on and is to talk to this woman, and so she asked Butch, like, well, hey, like, I just found out on the news that you just killed this man. Like, I've never known a person who was to go on and kill a person before. Like, how do you feel that you've killed this person? And Butch is just like, well, like I feel nothing. Because Butch is to go on and just say, it's like, well, like, I didn't know that the person died. Like, I left before, like, I found any of this out, so I feel nothing. And so the taxi driver's like, oh, okay, all right. Like, this is interesting. So Butch is to pay off this taxi driver to go on and not say anything to anybody about where this guy is. So Butch goes on and is to make his way home to his wife, where he is to go on and just kind of cuddle with her and spoon with her. And we have Butch, who's mentioning that he smells, but she's like, well, I don't care. Like, I just want you to cuddle with me. So at some point, it seems they go on, and Butch is to eventually be in the throes of passion with this woman. And then later on is to go on and take a shower as they're kind of getting ready for bed. So the very next day, we have Butch, who is getting ready for them to leave. They're going to get out of here. They're going to go on to eventually get all this money that they had gotten from beating this other opponent, because this whole match was fixed. And so Butch had called this guy mentioning that they should get all this money together by tomorrow, because Butch was to say, it's like, well, yeah, like, once everyone was to go on and find out that this match was fixed, like, the odds drastically changed in of course, Butch's favor to go on and give him a big payout. So Butch was to go on and was to eventually ask Fabian where his gold watch was. And Fabian is to go on and say, like, well, like I thought I grabbed it. And Butch was to be so ticked off because he didn't care about anything else that they were to have, but he was like, but that watch is really important to me. So to the point of Butch saying, I don't know how many times to Fabian about that watch and how important it really was. So Butch goes on and has to go back to his old place to find that watch specifically. And while he goes on and finds that watch, he realizes that there's a hitman that is using his bathroom. And so Butch goes on and is to find this gun and is to shoot not only other than Vincent and kills him, but then Butch goes on and cleans the gun and walks out of the place. Here's the thing though, Butch was to go on and put these like Pop-Tart looking things in this toaster, but then he never gets them and he never eats them. Because I guess the whole hitman thing. So, but Butch goes on and, or Butch, yeah, Butch goes on and is driving, thinking that he's like, ha 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 ha, yeah, like I got away from all this. All of a sudden to bump into none other than Wallace, Marcellus Wallace, while Marcellus is just kind of just walking through the street. And so Butch tries to run over Marcellus to then have him cause an accident to have Butch eventually get injured. So now Butch and Marcellus are running away from one another, and at some point Butch is to make it into this pawn shop. So we now have this pawn shop owner called Maynard, who is to have these two guys like scuffle within his pawn shop. And so Maynard is to pull a gun on them and is telling them like, hey, like, you guys stop trying to kill one another. So what ends up happening is they end up gagging both these men and putting them in the back of this pawn shop as this guy named Zed is coming in. And so come to find out what happens is both Marcellus and Butch are getting prepared for them to get taken advantage of in the back of this pawn shop. So, and then eventually killed. So we have this character called the Gimp that is to also be like presented here as this kind of weird, goofy looking character. So we have Butch, who is to kind of wait his turn, as we have Marcellus, who ends up getting taken first and into the back of this. So we have Butch that ends up somehow or another freeing himself, and so he punches the Gimp and runs off to the front of the store, and he decides to like, well, wait a minute, like, I want to try to do the right thing. So Butch goes on and starts grabbing a bunch of items that he thinks he's going to use to go against these guys, finding baseball bats. He ends up finding this kind of like samurai looking sword, this katana. Samurai, I'll just go with the samurai looking sword. So, because I want to like eventually like not feel like too much like I know something and then probably be wrong eventually. So Butch ends up getting this sword, this double-handed sword, and goes down and is to slice up Maynard and stab Maynard behind him, but then goes on and is to tempt Zed to grab this weapon, this gun that's nearby, and after Zed, let's just say, is to pull out of uh, of Marcellus, we have Marcellus that ends up getting up, finding the shotgun, and blasts into Zed. And then Marcellus is to tell Butch, it's like, well, hey, man, like, between you and me, like, really, if you kind of leave town tonight and, like, you're gone and gone forever, like, I'll forget this ever happened, because you also have to forget that this story ever happened between the both of us. And Butch is just like, okay, all right. And so Marcellus is to go on and is going to call a lot of his friends to go and torture this Zed guy to get even with him. And so Butch is to grab this motorcycle because his car is totaled to find his woman and is to go on and leave town. So that's kind of the end of that story. So we now have to go back to the other story here. So Vincent and Jules are to go on and are to have had Marvin in their car. And so Vincent is going on and talking to Marvin, and all of a sudden this gun goes off and shoots Marvin in the head. And now they're driving around with this bloodstained car, and now Jules is having to call his friend named Jimmy to hide this car for a little bit for them to figure things out. So Marcellus ends up going and getting a call from Jules stating that, like, hey man, like, I'm in some deep like in a place where like there's not an easy solution here. So Jules is to say, it's like, hey, what are you gonna do, Marcellus? And so Marcellus is to say, like, hey man, like I'm gonna go on and bring the wolf to you. So like go on and like feel like great that this is all gonna be covered. So we have Vincent and Jules, and we have this really interesting dialogue where Jimmy is to go on and say, it's like, well, hey, like, does any part of my like home like state to you that uh like that this is dead man storage? Like, do you think I go on and like I'm just to take in like dead bodies and that's like what I do here? And Jules is like, well, no. It's like, well, obviously, like, you feel that way if you feel like you can come to me with a dead body and just think that you can just leave this dead body here. And like Jimmy has like a wife that's gonna be coming home in an hour, and so like Jimmy has his own life, his own thing, and so we have Vincent, we have Jules who tries this coffee of that what Jimmy made for them. It's like, man, like this coffee's really good. It's like really organic stuff. And Jimmy's like, well, yeah, like I want to go on and get like really good coffee, so I don't want to get like the cheap stuff. Like, no, I want to go on and get something organic, something much more expensive, because I want to have a good cup of coffee. So we have everybody praising Jimmy for his coffee, and eventually when the wolf gets there, the wolf is to also praise Jimmy for his coffee also. So I'm like, yeah, the coffee must be really good. I never really drink. I probably like had coffee maybe once. I don't like hot beverages. I'm much more of a cold beverage guy. So like I rarely ever had hot cocoa or hot cocoa, if I can say that in English. Uh I never had hot cocoa or coffee. Like, I'm just not that guy. Like, I like cold beverages. Like I'll have like a Pepsi or a Coke or something like that, just because I like cold beverages instead of hot ones. Um, I've always ever wanted to try like kind of uh those kind of like cold coffees or whatever that like the the one like kind of other kind of goofy coffees that are I don't remember what they were called, but like I know there's like some kind of stuff out there. And some point for those coffee people out there, you'll probably know maybe what I'm talking about. But anyways, so moving on. So the wolf is to get this call from Marcellus and is to ask a bunch of details about what's going on. So the wolf is to make his way to this location and is to say that he's 30 minutes out, but he'll be there in like 10. And so he makes it in like 9 minutes and 30 seconds. So the wolf rushes there. And so the wolf is to mention to Jimmy, like, well, hey, you have certain like cleaning equipment, don't you? And so it's like, yeah. So basically the wolf is to tell Vincent and Jules like what to do, as he's just kind of like standing around and just kind of waiting for them to get done. And so we have Jules and we have Vincent that is going on and cleaning this car. And so Vincent was to go on and get all these demands from the wolf, and Vincent is to say, it's like, well, hey, can you like say please for all this stuff that you're demanding us to do? And the wolf's like, seriously? Like, I have to go on and tell you what to do, and I also have to say please and thank yous? Like, are you freaking kidding me? So we go on, and the wolf is to say, it's like, oh, pretty please with sugar on top. Like, sure. Like, yeah, like, whatever you freaking want, as long as you get all this stuff done on time within this hour. So we have Jules and we have Vincent who are cleaning this car, and Vincent's cleaning the front of it while Jules is going on and cleaning the brain parts. And then Jules to realize, like, well, hey, wait a minute. Why am I cleaning the brain parts? Like, why aren't you doing this? You were the guy who killed this guy in this car. So the wolf is to lay out to Jimmy that he needs a bunch of blankets to put into this part of this car, so they can kind of like have all like the kind of the blood stuff kind of not show while they're kind of driving this car around. So at some point, the wolf and Jimmy are to make their way to see this car that looks completely different of what it really was. And so the wolf and Jules are going to go to this like monsters like monsters truck, like, or god, monsters lot, like monsters car lot or something like that. I didn't know. This is the one thing that I probably should have like gone on and done a screenshot of what this title was, but I didn't really get to it. I know it was monster something. So the wolf was to go on and say that this place is normally used to like get rid of dead bodies and get rid of cars and stuff like that. So the wolf is to go on with Jules to drive this car, and Vincent is going to drive the wolf's car. And so they go on and they dump this car off, and everything seems to go smoothly. We also had Vincent and Jules who had to get their get this kind of quick shower being done with this kind of this hose outside. So they end up getting like tossed on all these shirts, and of course Jimmy is to mention how like goofy they look, but these were all actually Jimmy's shirts. So we have it where after these guys go on and deal with this whole ordeal that they had to go on and do, transition to then go on and have Vincent and have Jules, who are both going on at this diner. And so Jules is going on about the whole sign of it all, where Jules was to have this epiphany moment that maybe that sign about him dodging all these bullets were to tell him to no longer do this kind of job anymore, and that he's going to go off and be like some nomad, and is to eventually have Vincent call Jules like, well, you're gonna become a bum then. You're gonna go. You're just gonna like backpack from place to place to place, get into all these crazy adventures. You're just gonna be a bum. You're gonna be a homeless person. And Jules is like, well, maybe that's my calling. And so all of a sudden, Vincent and Jules are to realize that they're at the same restaurant where both Pumpkin and Honey Bunny are robbing. So back to the beginning of this movie, now towards the end, where we have Jules that is to go on and not want Pumpkin to get this briefcase. And so Jules ends up taking this gun from Pumpkin and is to kind of have these guys sit down. And like Jules is kind of talking to Honey Bunny and Pumpkin and trying to go on and say like, hey, like, I'm gonna go on and give you everything in my wallet, but like you can't take my briefcase, and you guys can take everything else. You can steal from these people, this manager, these guys, whatever, but you just can't take this briefcase because it's not mine. So Pumpkin, because his life is on the line, is to agree to all this. And so we have Jules, who's to recite this part of the Bible, and he never really knew what it really meant. But going on, like he would always say that to somebody before he would kill them. And if anything, the words seem more relevant now, talking to Pumpkin, than it seemed that it ever was in the past. So Jules is to mention how, like, right now, like, he is to see, this moment is to see Jules as the righteous, and that, like, Pumpkin is to go on and possibly be the bad guy here. So we have Jules, who is to go on and, like, this all works out, and as Jules is to consistently call Pumpkin Ringo for whatever goofy reason. So Vincent, the whole time, he was in the bathroom as this all was going on, and then he comes out and whips out his gun, and Vincent is saying some stuff here, and Jules is saying like, no, like, do not like kill these guys. Vincent, just shut up and just stand there. So really, they let the guys just rob this place, and afterwards, both Jules and Vincent are to walk out of this restaurant and get out of there quickly also. And that's just kind of how the movie just kind of wraps up for the most point. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that I forgot, because I'm sure there's a billion things that I probably did. There's a lot of dialogue of which that I probably didn't have specific names for. You can correct me in the thing below in comments and whatever, because at the end of the day, I can just say, whoop-ah, this is another review that I'm done with. So, with that said, I'm sure there's a massive number of other moments that I eventually forgot about in this review, but that's what happens when you have to go on and do a movie that is a fairly long film, but also, at the end of the day, is to be actually really good. I enjoyed it for the most part. It was kind of interesting, unique, and so yeah, that's it. I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy. I guess I didn't even do, like, a grading of this movie. Like, I would go on and probably say this movie is I would say it's a solid, good film. Like for the life of me, I can't say that it's easy. That like I can't say that it's a great film. Like it's a solid, good film. But so it's definitely a positive one. It's a definitely positive review. But that said, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.